Happy New Year and welcome to Financial Inclusion Unlocked Series 2. I'm your host, Jack Farron. If you're new here, welcome to the podcast. And if you've been with us in Series 1, thanks so much for coming back. We've got an incredible lineup ahead of us this season, with 10 episodes releasing every Monday from today through to the end of March, featuring conversations with innovators, practitioners and thought leaders who are really working to unlock the potential of financial inclusion. Before we dive into episode 1, I want to thank our sponsor for this season. Series 2 of Financial Inclusion Unlocked is brought to you by CGAP, the innovation lab for inclusive finance that works to advance the lives of people living in poverty, especially women, through financial inclusion. In today's episode, we're tackling a topic that is often overlooked in conversations about financial inclusion, but desperately needs more focus: disability inclusion. Why should financial service providers embrace disability inclusion in their operations? What are the opportunities? And more importantly, what are the practical steps that they can take? To help us answer these questions, I've brought together two exceptional experts. You'll first hear from Paul Surreaux, who I met in a studio in El Salvador, who is the co-founder of the Barrier-Free Finance Initiative. And later in the episode, you'll hear from Luis Fernando Sanabria, Chief Operating Officer of Fundación Paraguaya, a leading microfinance institution in Paraguay. So let's get started. Good morning, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Jack. Thanks for receiving me.
Great to have you here. And we're going to talk today about financial inclusion for people with disabilities and how financial service providers can work to become more inclusive. But before we start that, please tell me a little bit more about yourself and your work.
So my name is Paul Surreaux. I started my career 20 years ago in the inclusive finance sector. I was first project manager for an organization in Luxembourg, then moved to investment officer. And while being investment officer, I had an accident, a surfing accident, which actually left me as a person with disability, quadriplegic. So I'm fully in a wheelchair all the time. But after that, I got the opportunity to move to Myanmar actually and start my journey as a disability inclusion professional. I volunteered for an organization of people with disability, where I discovered an entire new sector of development, which was actually very exciting and very interesting. After that, I moved to Cambodia. I worked for a microfinance institution. And actually there I could link the two worlds, right? So I was head of department of a department looking into credit plus services for vulnerable population. And we had a project financed by DFA, the Australian department, to embed disability inclusion within our organization. So basically it was about mainstreaming disability inclusion at the level of the organization, but also tailoring products for people with disabilities. And there we realized the gaps, in the financial inclusion sector. And this is where we took the decision with colleagues to create the Barrier-Free Finance Initiative, which is a Luxembourgish NGO dedicated to the economic development of people with disabilities through an equitable access to financial services. Our mission is really to provide solutions for inclusive finance actors, whether it is education, awareness raising, data generation, and providing technical solutions to embed disability inclusion in the financial inclusion sector.
Thanks, Paul. And I think you've set the scene really nicely there. And as a podcast in the first episode of Series 2, we also want to shine a light on this topic, which, we've discussed before, that we feel, it is overlooked. And there is a huge opportunity for financial service providers to play in this space, but also so many barriers to overcome. So before we get into more about your work and also a look at Fundación Paraguaya as well with Luis Fernando, how do you define disability within this context of financial services?
Yeah, well, great question. The disability inclusion and disability start as a human right. So in 2006, you have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, that is now ratified by 180 plus countries, that define disability as, persons with disability actually as those that have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers, whether they are attitudinal or environmental, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So I think here is, two main concepts that intersect is the impairments per se and the barriers in society. The the intersection between those two creates disability. This is what the convention really put forward, is the social model of disability inclusion. We're not talking about charity, we're not talking about fixing persons with disability, but really removing those barriers that you see in the society. Impairments are human characteristics like gender, like race, like nationality. I think this is the root, intervention is really to remove discrimination so that you can, and barriers so that you can fully include persons with disability within the society.
So let's get into the kind of the scale of the challenge, right? How many people would be classed as having a disability across the population?
So at the global level, there is an estimate 16% of persons with disability, with different type of impairments, with different type of severity of those impairments. But there is 1 out of 7 person in the world that have some kind of disability. Actually, 80% of those people lives in low and middle income countries, of which we consider that 20% of the poorest people are people with disabilities, and people with disabilities are 50% more likely to become or to end up in poverty. Also, I think a very important thing to mention with disability is that you find people with disabilities in all subgroups of the population. So the intersectionality aspect of disabilities is very strong, and generally people with disability are the most marginalized within this population. An example is that 75% of people with disabilities in low and middle income countries are actually women with disabilities, which is very strong.
There's 2 stats you mentioned there: 16% of the global population, and that 75% of those with disabilities in low and middle income countries are women. So for someone working on this topic day in, day out, why do you think it's so overlooked within the financial inclusion sector and the kind of spaces and gatherings that we have?
I think the first big challenge is about awareness. Like discrimination faced by people with disabilities are more due to a lack of understanding of what is disability, on how to address disability, rather than some kind of negative attitude against disability. Well, to some extent. So I think this is the first barrier that people with disability face: lack of awareness. There's different type of barriers, right? So especially when we are at the financial services sector, it starts at the systemic level. As I mentioned, the lack of awareness. There's very few data collected on disability inclusion, which doesn't help in programming, in having evidence for decision making, which in turn doesn't position disability within the agendas as a priority topic, right? Because it's you don't have this awareness, there's no data, so actually it's a bit hidden, forgotten to some extent. There's also very few policies about disability inclusion in financial services, which doesn't provide the guidelines to FSPs and the roadmaps, so that they can fully implement best practices. I think this is something that really needs to be addressed. Policies and roadmaps, guidelines. That's something. And the last piece is that, financial inclusion is development, is about, addressing the needs of vulnerable population. But because there is very few interaction with the disability inclusion sector, then, there is no expertise in disability inclusion that could help financial providers and actors to embed disability inclusion within their operations. Right?
So those are kind of some of the systemic side barriers. But then if we look on the demand and supply side as well, what else are you seeing?
Yeah. So demand side barriers. So, because of this lack of awareness and this lack of planning for disability inclusion, people with disabilities often lack of access to education, access to healthcare, access to transport that will help them, be integrated in society. So these at the financial services level end up in very low financial literacy and understanding of financial services by persons with disability. Also, as financial services become more and more online, more and more digital, there is a big, digital literacy gap of people with disabilities. Another one is that, the informality of income generating activities by persons with disabilities, because they don't have access to formal employment. So the lack of the documentation often needed by FSPs to provide services and so on. And also the people with disabilities tend to have less assets that they can put as collaterals, which, all this makes barriers to access financial services. Then on the supply side barriers, so at the FSP level, there's the physical barriers. So point of services, branches, ATMs that are not accessible for different types of impairments, are, for example, for wheelchair users, or ATMs that don't have the features of the possibility to plug in assistive device for persons who are blind. There's obviously the digital exclusion interfaces that are not accessible for different types of impairments, again, cognitive impairments, or again, people that cannot see. It makes it very difficult to access those interfaces, online banking and so on. Information that is not in accessible formats, or alternative to, for example, written contracts or written signatures, makes it very difficult for people with disability to get the information about financial services. And finally, and maybe again the most critical barrier I will say is the attitudinal barriers. Stereotypes, attitudes such as, for example, believing that people with disabilities are more risky clients. Those attitudes makes a strong barrier for people with disabilities to actually access financial services. And then, there's other barriers like policies that indirectly, for example, or even directly discriminates against people with disabilities. Those are the barriers that people with disability face.
Thanks for setting out the barriers. So let's explore now some case studies of financial service providers that are really making headway in this space. Now, I want to take you to Luxembourg, where I had the opportunity to sit down with Luis Fernando Sanabria, the Chief Operating Officer of Fundación Paraguaya. Fundación Paraguaya is a pioneering microfinance institution that has been at the forefront of financial inclusion in Paraguay for years. I started by asking Luis Fernando to tell me a little bit about the history of the organization and how they've approached serving their communities.
We started 40 years ago to promote people's agency and self-efficacy, with the idea that everyone owns its own poverty. So our first program, still the biggest in Paraguay, was the microfinance program. Later on, we started to provide entrepreneurial education program for sons and daughters of our clients in microfinance. And 20 years ago, we developed a new educational model, the self-sufficient school. Lastly, in 2010, we created the poverty stoplight, which is a new methodology and metric to approach multidimensional poverty. So it's been a long journey, but always based on people's and their capacity and their potential.
Fantastic. Well, glad to have you here. And I'm sure we'll speak more about the poverty stoplight, but I'm really interested if you could take me to 2012, where I understand this is where the organisation started to research and look into the potential of offering financial services to persons with disabilities, which at the time in Paraguay would be a segment that was especially underserved. So what was the story behind that in those early years?
Very interesting because it comes from the poverty stoplight. Before the stoplight, we used to work with our clients to financially include them, meaning that helping them to generate more income, and we succeed somehow. Our clients were not poor anymore in terms of how poverty was measured by then in Paraguay and in many other countries, in terms of money. So there is a national poverty line, and most of our clients overcame the national poverty line. So we just checked they were not poor anymore. But it was also a mission drift. Are we working with the poorest clients in the country? And a contradiction, because even though they make enough money, they still lack of proper bathroom. They still host relatives that were people with disability without taking care of them, without a proper wheelchair or proper care. There's still lack of self-esteem, many ways of being poor. So we tried to to use any of the existing indexes, because there are many powerful indexes in the world. But we found out that those indexes talk to some stakeholders, as governments, as multilateral agencies, as NGOs, but it means nothing for families. So families can do nothing with an index, because being 7 out of 10 in any given index, how do they eat that? How do they move with that? So that's how we came out with the Poverty Stoplight, which is basically a self-evaluation that families run using a survey we developed with drawings and color codes. And we have 50 indicators, and every indicator has 3 levels: red, yellow, and green. So, for example, if you have a faucet or a tap in your house, you are green in drinking water. You are not poor. If you have a well, so that's yellow situation. You are poor. If you have to carry the water from outside your place, that is a worse situation. That is red. And like that. So having that self-evaluation, families can prepare a plan to overcome poverty. And with that information gathered and aggregated, microfinance organizations and all type of organizations certainly can better provide targeted solutions to their clients. And one of the things we found out was that people with disability, they were not protagonists in their families. They were just kind of abandoned people, and nobody in the financial sector took care of them. And they were perfectly able of doing things. They were not incapable people, just people with disability. And that is how we started to think in that area, as a way to financially include them, but also as a way to help their families overcome their multidimensional poverty. And we succeed. We succeed after more than 10 years. Today, this is a segment of our business. It's not anymore a program. It's not anymore a project funded for any given donor, but something established and replicable.
Just take me there to that, so that you've got the stoplight, and from that you've deduced that this is something that really needs to happen in terms of designing inclusive finance products for people with disabilities. But if you're looking in the local ecosystem, there's nothing happening. So where did you look, or who did you talk to? What were the next steps for you to actually take action?
Well, the next step, and in our very simple thinking, was how do we fix our offices to make them accessible? Yeah. So that was our first thought, and it wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right. It wasn't wrong because you need to fix your offices to make it accessible.
These are for your staff, or the branches for clients?
The branch for clients at the beginning. But it's not the most important thing. It's far from being the most important thing. So we started to partner with other existing organizations that work with people with disability to see what were all the aspects to take in consideration to make our program accessible for people with disability. We were afraid of being to create a special product for them, because how do you create a special product? Subsidized product, probably. That was our initial thinking. We were wrong one more time. And how do you make your program financially viable? And that is very important, because it's the only way to make it replicable in the microfinance industry. So thanks to the partnership we had with the Center for Financial Inclusion, with Acción International, and with local organizations, we started to develop the concept, and we found out that there are at least 5 aspects to take in consideration. One is to physically adapt your offices to make it accessible for people with disability. That is important. More important than that is to train your staff, to train them to be open to incorporate people with disability. Starting with your security guard. You may have the proper and beautiful RAM, but if your security guard is not open to host people with disability, so they won't use it. They won't welcome them. You have to train your credit officers for them to look proactively for people with disability as a client and not as a beneficiary to whom to get a wheelchair or to whom to get access to health services. That's a clients, and we found tons of clients. We have delivered almost 9,000 loans since then, which means there are 9,000 persons with disability that runs a proper loan, a profitable, business, micro enterprise. Yeah. And number 3 is to adapt your internal procedures so to hire people with disability as part of your staff. Okay. That is very important as well, because the only way of really incorporate clients with disability is having people with disability among your staff, and not staff with disability to take care of clients with disability. No, staff with disability to make that something that is natural in the office, that is normal in the office, to help your staff to be trained and ready for the occasion. That was also very important, and that implies not only the decision of hiring somebody, but to change your procedures to make them open to incorporate people with disability. Next one is to adapt the way you deliver your products. It's not the product itself. I mean, the microloan conditions, we didn't change a single condition in the microloans condition. The microloans are the same for people with disability or for people without disability. I mean, the interest rate, how long is the loan, the installment, the administration fee, everything is the same. Actually, we run 2 big programs. The main one is a Village Bank program, which basically means you put 15 women in one group and they access the loan as a group and they repay the loan as a group, they get trained as a group, etc. So we have people with disability in that program, which means those ladies with disabilities are incorporated in those groups integrated by at least 15 members. And then we have the individuals loans as well. So everything related to the product is the same.
So the group loans, just to ask, so the 15 women that will be in the group, are they encouraged they all have individual business ideas and how they would use the loan, or they're coming together as a cooperative with a joint venture?
Both. Both. I mean, they have individual businesses that anyone decide which business. Some of them get access to micro franchises, for example, when they don't have idea on what to do. That is the individual part. They also access individually to the loans in the sense that you have your specific amount that is specific for your business, but as a cooperative in the sense that they all co-guarantee the loan, and they have to collect the installment from all their members. So they cannot come to Fundación Paraguaya to pay individually the loan. Okay. You know? We only take one installment. If 14 of them collect the installment and one doesn't, we don't take the money. So in that way, the problem keeps in the group. So fully integrated, what has changed is the way we deliver. You need special procedures to make the document signed by people with disability, for example. In some places, you have to allow your branch manager to deliver the loan in the family's house, because that if the person is very hard for them to move, and that is not a normal procedure. So you have to change small procedures to make it possible to deliver the loan to them, and also advertisement. You know, it's not the same way you advertise your products for people that are deaf or blind or cannot. Don't have skills to read, etc. So you have to adapt all of them. And finally, and it's been very key in what we have done, is to partner with organizations of people with disability. And this is equally important. I mean, it's important in both sides, because we learn from them and they learn from us as well. Normally, organizations and people with disability, at least in Paraguay, and I'm sure in South America, broadly speaking, they are very based in subsidies. They think that governments have to subsidize people with disability. And that takes dignity from people with disability. That is only necessary in certain circumstances, but not always, not for a business. For a business, they are perfectly capable of running any given business by themselves, and they need a microloan that are adapted in the way I mentioned, but not in the conditions, because that is what makes that microloan viable, and that is how we can massify the services to people with disabilities. So we work a lot with them, with organizations of people with disability, their organizations, and it's been a win-win situation in which we managed to completely establish now a new product in our organization.
Wow, amazing. So a couple of questions. You mentioned around the product documents and the advertising. And I think we can also bring in here financial literacy materials as well. So what is your focus within Fundación Paraguay in terms of how you would communicate this? I assume you need a multi-channel approach with audio content, video content, depending on the needs of your customers and how they would best interpret and receive information.
Yeah, you need both. You need different ways to approach according to their disability. We work a lot with blind people, but it's also maybe the most important approach is through the groups, because they are the ones that are closer to the person with disability than any social media. So they live in the same neighborhood. Is a self-selected group, so they are probably relatives or good friends or neighbors. So through them is the best way to communicate, and it's been very supportive to those persons. But yeah, well, we use everything that is known, and we train our people to be able to manage the language of deaf people. We have some documents in Braille for a blind people, for example. According to the law, they have to come with two witnesses to sign the document. So this is the way to do it if you don't have the document in Braille and things like that. But it's been a challenge, but it's been a wonderful challenge, and the results are just fantastic.
And you mentioned this is a segment of your business. It's not a project. It's not a program. And through this podcast and meeting so many different people and projects across the world that work on financial inclusion, there is still a reliance on donor funding in many projects and many segments. So when I heard about that, I was particularly curious to ask more about that journey. You did mention some support with Centre for Financial Inclusion and Axion, but what does that journey look like towards sustainability in this segment in particular?
Well, I would say that you have to start with the goal of making your project sustainable. And this is part of one of our values in Fundación Paraguay, to keep always a right balance between what is social and what is financial, because many reasons that gives you freedom. You are not depending on donors. We suffer somehow when USAID disappeared last year, but not that much. But many NGOs disappeared. So that is an essential part of the journey. Start with a clear goal of making your project sustainable. And this is how we started. The first stage was run with the Center for Financial Inclusion and other local NGOs, and they helped us to open the door in 7 offices. Mainly we did physical improvement of the branches and training of the staff. I remember the project bringing wheelchairs to the office, and branch managers using the wheelchairs just to feel what somebody feels. I remember myself participating in a tournament among companies in Paraguay on wheelchair rugby, and how difficult was that for us, that we're not used to use wheelchair. Even though I even remember that my wheel of the wheelchair exploded, and because that is how the rugby goes. So, and I stand up, and then somebody came and told me, "Why are you standing up? You are not able to do that. You have to stay in your wheelchair." So lessons learned. That was the first stage. The second was to take this program to 15 of our branches, and there is when we changed our procedures and started to establish the program. That was thanks to a support we got from USAID. To make it deeper, the third stage was to work with blind people, with people that didn't see, and we took it to all our offices. We have 26 offices now, and there was also the time we started to change the statistics, the IT system, so to properly reflect statistics on that field. And the fourth stage is where we are now. We have no donors right now pushing the program, which is fantastic. It becomes natural. We still keep partnership with organizations with people with disability. We are going under an evaluation now to see what else we can improve as an organization, not as a program for people with disability. But for example, as an organization, something we recently learned is that to be completely inclusive, you have to make your value chain inclusive. So we are now starting to work with providers. That is banks that fund our portfolio, or suppliers, different type of suppliers, to make sure to give preference to those that are inclusive at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask you about that because we've spoken about impact on clients, but I also want to see, as a first mover, your impact on the Paraguayan financial sector in terms of our perspectives changing, that other financial institutions see, okay, we can also play in this space and really have an impact, but also this is commercially viable at the same time.
Yeah, and we are on it now. We are part of a network called Suma, pushed by Saraki, a local organization, and they are putting together different actors that can provide services related to income generation to people with disability, and they are the one pushing for this evaluation. And I think it's fantastic, and we have our reputation in the market, and we are putting this reputation on the service of this new effort. I think everybody, every organization, every bank, every commercial, every financial company can help in that regard, because this is a viable. There are people with disability that need special support, but most of them just need an opportunity, and we are in condition to provide opportunity, and we have to do it.
Paul, we've just heard from Luis Fernando from Fundación Paraguaya about the work that they are leading in Paraguay, including their poverty spotlight. And I know yourself at Barrier Free Finance Initiative have had the opportunity to work with their team. So how does their story resonate with you, and what else are you seeing across the world of other inclusive financial service providers that are doing great work on this topic?
Yeah, I think Fundación Paraguaya journey, it's really storytelling on how to really embrace disability inclusion step by step, but really realizing the benefits for a FSP, a social FSP in particular, to embrace disability inclusion. There's many other examples. I mean, before creating Barrier Free Finance Initiative, Alison Turnberg, my colleague, and I worked for Shamron Microfinance to embed disability inclusion. And this journey was also enlightening on how, with trainings and small accessibility adjustments, you can really make a difference for persons with disability. There's plenty of other examples here and there. For example, I can mention Opportunity Bank in Uganda that has now embraced disability inclusion, that collects data disaggregated by type of disability, and that really makes a difference in the strategic planning process. And those are amazing examples of disability inclusion.
We had the Opportunity Bank team on in series 1 of the podcast talking about their work on refugee finance. So it's great to hear that they're also making strides on disability inclusion. But from what I'm hearing from you, and also from what Luis mentioned, there really is a business case here, right? So what does the market opportunity look like for those FSPs that are designing systems and infrastructure that can really be inclusive for people with disabilities?
Yeah, the business case of disability inclusion is definitely there. That's the magic of embracing disability inclusion. So obviously there's the social and human right component of it, the imperative. Any organization that seek to achieve the 2030 sustainable goal must include persons with disability as the principle of leaving no one behind. Without persons with disability, this principle will not be achieved. Also, organization embracing disability inclusion are perceived by stakeholders, by the society, as responsible organization, which brings the organization reputation to another level. There's, as you mentioned, obviously the market opportunity. We're talking about 16% of the global population. There's an untapped market opportunity there. Integrating people with disability within the workforce, it's also something very strong. Persons with disability come with different perspective, different problem-solving skills, but also integrating them into teams, enhance motivation, engagement, team spirit, and this has been proven by different type of studies. So that's key, to champion disability inclusion internally as part of the disability inclusion journey. There's, embracing disability inclusion improves the experience of all clients, actually, and this is through embracing universal design, which means designing for all people, brings this innovation component. Just giving an example of the ramp. The ramp is mandatory for a person in a wheelchair, but actually it will benefit travelers with luggages, parents with baby carts, delivery personnel, etc., etc. And this innovation that brings disability inclusion, it's key, for the quality of the service of an FSP. And well, finally, there's obviously the risk mitigation aspect. Nowadays, most countries have disability inclusion laws, employment quotas, accessibility laws that FSPs must comply with. Also, as ESG is getting more and more key in the private sector landscape, it also mandates for disability inclusion.
So we heard from Louis on Fundación Paraguay's 5 pillars for success in embracing and championing disability inclusion. But through your work, Paul, at BFFI, for senior leaders from financial institutions that are listening to this podcast and thinking, how do we start this journey to embrace disability inclusion more? Is there any best practices that you could share?
Firstly, disability inclusion is a cross-cutting topic, right? We spoke about it as, it addresses all subgroups of the population, but also the idea of embracing disability inclusion is not so much about tailoring products for people with disabilities, but rather making sure that your organization is fully accessible for everybody, right? And to reach that, there's a few simple steps to put forward. Firstly, commit to disability inclusion, right? Being aware of the benefits of disability inclusion, appointing a person with a champion of disability inclusion, and especially training staff. Because with training, even if you don't have the budgets, whenever people will be aware, they will be able to assist and be aware of the needs of persons with disability. Secondly, and I think Luis definitely mentioned that, partnering with organization of persons with disability, integrating the lived experience of persons with disability within the planning process, accessing their expertise, it's key. In disability inclusion, we often refer to nothing about us without us, but it's key because people with disabilities know about their needs, different type of impairments, and so on. Then collecting data. This will enable to identify the gaps. This will enable to plan and inform decision making. And finally, planning for accessibility. I mentioned universal design, being able to put accessibility measure, whether it is in the physical environment, but also within policies, within the digital infrastructure. it's key to include persons with disability and to ensure that they can benefit from the same services and rights as any other persons. There's easy wins, small things that we can put in place without big budgets, but that can make real differences.
I was going to ask that because for those that are working at financial institutions, maybe in low-income countries that have the commitment to do more on this, but may have limitations in terms of the financial investments that they can put in, what would you say to them in terms of those small wins that they can make?
Yeah, small wins, as even if, for example, you cannot adapt fully your branch, make sure that you can have your staff, your frontline staff, to visit people with disabilities where they are, because remember, there's barriers for people with disabilities, especially in low and middle income countries, of access to transport. So if your loan officers can go to their home to deliver the service, you're already removing one of the barriers without investing too much and also communicating. For example, maybe you will have only one branch that is accessible. Make sure that people with disabilities knows where these branches are. So those will be small wins and step by step. So the idea is, to plan, obviously, on a short term, medium term, and long term, and start with small adjustments and slowly but surely being able to embed disability inclusion across your operations.
So, Paul, you mentioned a quote that is quite interesting: "Nothing about us without us." So, if we look more broadly at the financial inclusion sector, so not just local FSPs, but also development partners, technical support agencies, etc. How important is it that people with disabilities are actively driving this forward and developing the solutions for disability inclusion within the financial services context?
That's key. That's fundamental to the solution, right? There's people with disabilities organized in associations in almost all the countries in the world, often by type of impairments. They really know what they need. They can help FSPs also understand their patterns, usage of financial services. They often have the capacity to train FSP staff in disability inclusion principles. So I think this collaboration, coordination between the two sectors, and I mentioned that it was one of the barriers, I think this is fundamental to the solution, right? So I think it's really, really key to the success to partner with organization of people with disabilities. We partner with those organizations in the countries where we implement projects to ensure that the specific needs and the specific context in a country are taken into consideration.
So Paul, tell me a bit more about Barrier Free Finance Initiative, the NGO that you co-founded out of Luxembourg. So what specific resources and help do you have on offer for FSPs that are starting to walk this journey?
So we have developed different types of tools and methodologies, not only for FSPs, for the whole inclusive finance actors, for example, for central banks and regulators to understand the needs to identify the gaps at a sector level, to plan, to ensure that national financial inclusion policies can be accessible. For FSPs more specifically, we have designed a disability inclusion scorecard methodologies, again, to identify gaps, to make sure that we can create action plans and obviously support FSPs in implementing those gaps. We also, have partnered with sector leading organizations such as Surreaux and the Social Performance Task Force. We are currently issuing a disability inclusion guide for FSPs that includes the universal standards of social performance management indicators within this guide, so that we can, FSPs can benefit from this roadmap to plan for disability inclusion. We are creating a community of practice, building on the commitment, the Global Disability Summit commitment that we have issued in partnership with 5 leading financial inclusion organizations, such as the World Food Programme, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, Humanity and Inclusion, Grameen Foundation, and the European Microfinance Platform, so that, we can create a platform to share knowledge and really to exchange best practices in disability inclusion for financial inclusion providers.
Fantastic. So I have 3 questions. First one is the guide for FSPs that you're releasing. When will that be coming out, and how can our listeners access that?
The guide will be out in the coming months before April, definitely. So yes, that's really a resources that we look forward to put out there because we believe that it really creates this roadmap for FSPs.
And then the community of practice. Tell me a little bit more about how that works and how organizations can also take part and join.
The idea is to have a specific page within our website where different actors can access resources, not only from BFFI, but all the resources that we have gathered from our partners. We plan to build action groups of specific topics. For example, let's say women, the interaction between women and disability, digital inclusion, accessibility in digital financial services, which is a key component to ensure that persons with disability can access financial services. Creating these subtopics about disability inclusion that we can work alongside industry experts to ensure that resources are there, best practices are shared, and that's the idea of this community of practice.
Amazing. And finally, then this scorecard for FSPs to kind of understand the gaps, what's missing, and where they can take action. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a stage process. We have developed what we called a self-assessment diagnostic assessment tool for FSPs. This one, FSPs can access it by contacting us. Basically, it's divided across 5 dimensions of disability inclusion. It's a survey of 50 plus questions that the FSP can answer. And as BFFI, we can provide a 5-page analysis of what are the main gaps and what are the recommendations. And then when the FSP want to go deeper, then we have this disability inclusion scorecard that I mentioned, which includes accessibility audits, includes interviews with key personnel, so that we can really have a snapshot of the organization gaps based on their priorities, so that we can plan for disability inclusion.
Paul, thanks so much for joining me on the Financial Inclusion Unlocked podcast and giving your time to such an important topic that we wanted to have a focus on in series 2. But before I let you go, if you can have kind of one short sentence or kind of word of advice for financial service providers about the next step that they can do, the one thing that they can do to embrace disability inclusion, what would you say to them?
My key message, is like every actor within the inclusive finance sector has a role to play in disability inclusion by embedding disability inclusion within their operations. We really want to promote a systemic change.
This conversation with our 2 guests today really highlighted just how much opportunity there is for financial service providers to do more when it comes to disability inclusion. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe or follow Financial Inclusion Unlocked wherever you're listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast app. That way, you won't miss any of the 9 remaining episodes we have coming your way this season. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn on our new page at Financial Inclusion Unlocked to join the conversation and stay updated on new episodes and insights from the world of financial inclusion, including video highlights from today's episode. This podcast is produced by SIJ Media, and Series 2 is proudly sponsored by CGAP. For more information on financial inclusion and the work of CGAP, check out their website by visiting cgap.org. That's cgap.org. I'm Jack Farron, and I'll see you for the next episode.